want to ask a question and get a couple answers, so you can feel free to shout back. What is the first chore you remember being responsible for growing up? Washing dishes. Putting clothes away. Cleaning inside the furnace. Your first. Oh my goodness. Feeding the dogs. Feeding the baseboards. Dusting furniture. Yes, nothing says excitement like dusting things, right? I grew up with Tim, watching Home Improvement, Tim Allen. I want to put that rag on like a drill bit and just more power. Yeah. I don't know if I could really have a Father's Day reference without Tim Allen. That's just me. But anyways, the goal is, for those of you who are parents, is to give your kids responsibility, or in a sense, authority, to mature and to grow and to learn how to be an adult, right? Unless you want little minions and just little gremlins to clean stuff for you. The goal is, as a parent, is that your child is going to grow up not just chronologically in age, but also in ability, mental and emotional maturity, so that they can be unleashed upon the world. That's the goal. And so hopefully, you have done your job, and so that they go out and they will do what you did, that they will get a job, whether it's the same job or different job, but that they will have kids and have learned some lessons and principles so that they too can become who they are supposed to be. Of course, that's how God has gifted them and has called them to be. I am not a parent. But I remember when I was first working on this series, which stemmed from an idea from Tyler shared, and he asked me, what it would be like to be, as a spiritual parent. And of course, as a spiritual parent, you have a lot of folks that are older than you, even though you're the spiritual father in the sense of the church. And I got to thinking, it's like, like a real parent, sometimes you get a little frustrated with your kids, right? Parents, have you ever just wanted to? As a spiritual parent, sometimes I just want to, not that I condone it, but sometimes that temptation is there. Parents, can I get a witness? We've all been there. And so I got to thinking a little bit, as parents, you try to raise your kids, in a sense, as a pastor, and even as Christians, we engage in this thing called discipleship, and the goal is to raise people up to a spiritual maturity so that they too, like a child growing up, can be unleashed upon the world to be who they were created to be, to give them responsibility and authority to make an impact in the world. That they're no longer being spoon-fed, but are eating whole foods, eating all parts of the diet, not just the spoon stuff that you give kids. And Paul uses that illustration as well. And so I wanted to wrestle this with a little bit for us this morning, because if the goal of the disciple is to be like Jesus, and that's in the Hebrew, what a disciple is, talmid, is one who wants to be who Jesus is, want to be like Jesus. And so discipleship then is that process of maturing, of growing, of discipling, of building up and keeping accountable, for getting them from down here up to up here. And so this discipleship process is the goal that everyone takes, so that they can get to the point that not only are they just receiving stuff, but they're also giving as well as Christians. And this might be a little hard to wrap our minds around, because many cases we presume that the pastor is the one who does all discipleship, when the Bible tells us that everyone's involved in this. Everyone is a participant and a partner, as Paul says in Philippians, in this thing called discipleship, in this thing called church. And so we see here in our passage here, Paul is writing to Timothy. This is the second letter in the Bible. And Paul has been, the goal of letters for Paul is to renew Timothy's energy, is to encourage and to build him up. In fact, I like how it puts it in the NIV, is that Paul says in the first chapter, he says, for this reason, part of writing this letter, I remind you to fan into the flame the gift of God. I'm here to just stoke the fire, Paul says. And so he reminds him of the spiritual legacy he's already inhabited. He's already been given. His grandmother and mother are named as Lois and Eunice, as part of those who had really helped give Timothy this spiritual legacy. So Timothy's faith, Paul recognizes, is now just as strong as his parents, as he's grown and matured. And of course, Timothy has already been involved with Paul in his ministry and has been sent to places to take care of churches and build them up and go to the next church and build them up. And of course, go help Paul when Paul needs help and then to go to the next place and the next place. And so Timothy's involved in kind of professional ministry, kind of like a pastor. But he's also given a special instruction here, which we have in our passage this morning. So again, Timothy's been reminded of this call and this legacy he has. And so he says, you then, my son. Now, Paul is not Timothy's biological father. He is his spiritual father. And so Paul's recognizing the special relationship and the personal investment that he has placed into Timothy and the expectation that he kind of has of Timothy as a father. And of course, Paul's, you can kind of see already in the letter, he's already kind of smiling. He's proud of Timothy and how awesome Timothy's been. But he knows that, as a human being, we all need encouragement. Because Timothy's going to continue the work. And so he says, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. Timothy, Paul says, of all the things you've heard me teach, say, and do, I want you to not only take them and hold on to them, I want you to take it, and then I want you to give it to others as well. And so as much as we kind of see a generational passing of the baton, Paul's anticipating that this baton is going to be handed down further and further and further and further. In fact, we can kind of infer 5 spiritual generations inferred and then this passage alone. 5 spiritual generations. Again, not chronological, 5 spiritual generations. We have Paul writing the letter. And then he talks about, you've heard me say in front of many witnesses. There's a lot of other people who have heard this message, including your mother and grandmother. And then there's Timothy, who's receiving this letter. And Paul's saying, take now what you've been given, and I want you to give it to the next spiritual generation. I want you to find those who are reliable, not those who are the most skilled, not the most best at whatever the world determines. I want you to give those to the best character, the most trustworthy, and teach it to them so that they can teach others. See, Paul is already in this letter, as he's thinking about his spiritual son and how he's grown and matured, Paul's already thinking about 2 generations after himself. 2 generations where Paul is never going to have a chance to talk to. They're never going to hear him preach. They're never going to hear him teach. He's never even going to lay eyes on them. And so he says, Timothy, take what you have and look towards the next 2 generations and even more. Because if the goal is to hand it off to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, this is going to keep going beyond Paul, beyond Timothy. Like a wildfire, it should spread uncontrollably. And it should maintain itself if it's given to reliable, trustworthy people. And so then it becomes important for Timothy to remember is that he's not just there to put on a good show. He's not there to just hold meetings, because we all know how awesome meetings are, right? He's there to build up the next spiritual and maybe chronological generation of Christians. Because part of Paul's encouragement is to imitate him, to look forward to the next 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. To have this message that has been given to him. Because Paul, he encountered Jesus. and made sure that the gospel that he was teaching was correct when he met with the apostles and with James and Jerusalem, to take that and entrust that and guard it and protect it and hand it off to the next generation so that it will endure and not be polluted. Because one of the things Paul and Timothy have been facing is that there are false teachers. And that's actually later in chapter 2 that Paul says, keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them against quarreling and fighting and twisting this. And so it has to be handed to people who are reliable, who have character, who are trustworthy, so that they then can share it with others. Because you can only do so much. You can only go so far. And I'm thinking that's pretty brilliant, because as I hit 40 last year, I was like, I can't do this forever. And so what am I doing to hand it off to a next generation? Again, chronologically, but also the next spiritual generation. But again, this is something that everyone is not only invited, but we are all called to do. Because this, I found out, is actually the way of God, how it's been done since the beginning. You think about it, Genesis. When God creates all the animals and the plants and the things in the air and the sky, and then he crafts Adam. And then he gets Adam up and he brings Adam to a place and he says, all right, I'm going to make the animals parade in front of you and you get to name them. Now for us as 21st century Americans, that doesn't seem like a big deal. Maybe a fun project. But in the ancient world, to be able to name something meant that you had power. So we see from the very beginning of creation, God shares authority, a power with humanity. And then we read a little further in the Bible, and there's these people called prophets. And for some reason, God gives them power, authority to perform miracles. And then I think about Elijah, where God tells Elijah, you can shut up the rains or you can make it rain. At Elijah's will? Holy smokes. And then, of course, Israel forgets, and then, of course, they fail over and over and over again. And so then Jesus comes, and he shows the way of what God intended, the life that we are supposed to have, when he gathers 12 different misfits from all different backgrounds and begins to teach them, not just give them information, but also give them formation. And before they're even ready to be unleashed, as recorded in Matthew chapter 10, basically says, all these things you see me do, all the things you've heard me teach, I want you to go do that now. Be like taking a first-year seminary student and say, all right, you ready? I didn't feel ready after 3 years of seminary. But Jesus says, basically, go practice what I've taught you. Go practice what I've shown you. And not only does it do it once, but a few chapters later, now after he sends out the 12, he sends out the 70. And just think about the excitement that they had, because it's recorded, they came back and says, Jesus, this was so awesome, even the demons are subject unto us. How cool is that? And Jesus says, awesome, yep. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is that your names are written in heaven. You know the Father. That is the source. That is the primary relationship that matters. The reason why this is so important for all of us, no matter where we are in our discipleship, is that we are in different places and we sometimes get so busy, we get so distracted that we sometimes forget to reconnect to the source, which is God. And many of us are trying to do life like cell phones who haven't had a charge for 2 days. I think about my laptop that once the battery gets low, it starts shutting some things down. I mean, you can keep going for a little bit, but it's starting to shut some things down. The screen gets a little dimmer, and it seems to act a little slower. The same thing happens to us in our spiritual walk if we don't get connected and plugged into the source. And so we stretch ourselves and we forget that we got to plug in. In many cases, we don't like to plug in because that makes us stop. It makes us slow down. and we're busy looking at the watch or the calendar. Now think about when the phone finally dies or the laptop finally dies, you have to stop. And you got to get plugged in back into the source. Now I was thinking about the charger I take with me. That cord ain't very long. I'm going to have to sit on the floor next to the wall if I still want to use my phone, if I need to get it charged. Which reminds me, there's times I need to slow down and sometimes sit down to reconnect to God. And sometimes I need a reminder that I need a father figure in my life, a spiritual type of father, a mentor, coach, whatever that might be, to say, hey, you do need to slow down. Because in many cases, we say, oh, I know. And we keep going. You need to take a break. I know. And we keep going. And even as adults, we can sound like teenagers. Because parents, you've ever heard your kids say, oh, I know, and they don't do it? Can I get a witness? And those of you with littles, you're going to hear it. You're going to see it. Sometimes I still do it at 4 years old. There's times we're going to need encouragement, and there's times we're going to need to be reminded of our call. Because not only does Paul tell Timothy to remind him of his call and to make sure everything that he's been giving, that he has to hand off, that this is going to be a little hard. Because then he invites us, join me in the suffering like a good soldier. No one serving a soldier's life gets entangled in civilian affairs. Paul's basically saying, when you live this Christian life, you got to be single-minded. And it's not that we're going to forget life, not we're going to forget our jobs or forget our kids. Basically, for us, what this would mean is Jesus Lord of your life or not? Are you plugged into the source or not? Does believing in Jesus actually have an impact on your life? And if not, why not? And so there's times where we're going to have to slow down. We're going to have to get reconnected. And he gives this image of an athlete, someone who wins by competing by the rules. And of course, to win, you have to compete by the rules. You can't step out of bounds. You can't make up your rules as you go along. This isn't Calvin Ball. But you must be prepared and be active in the race. There is no sitting on the sidelines. Everyone is a participant. And I was thinking about, in the ancient world, and, because, people have training programs nowadays to compete in those ancient races that you would actually have to complete a 10-month training program. Can you imagine squeezing that in with a 9-to-5 job? Some people do it. Heck, the U.S. cricket team beat Pakistan, and they have full-time jobs compared to so many around the world. But like the farmer, you have to work hard. And if you work hard, you will get a part of the harvest. You get a piece of the prize. You get to be one of the first in line. And so what we need to take from all of this is that we are in a relay race. We're in a religious relay race, a spiritual relay race, where we have to train ourselves spiritually to run the race. And we have to get in position so that we can win the race, but we also have to help others get ready for the race. Because in a relay race, you have four people running. And then you have to take this thing called a baton, and you have to run and hand it off to the next person, because the next person in line's got to run, and they got to match your speed and be able to do this and trust each other with just looking blindly with a blind handoff so that they could take the baton and run the race. And so you have to be ready. You have to be strong. You have to be fast. You have to match speed. And you got to be able to hand off seamlessly. And that's only possible when you train, when you strengthen, when you practice, and then when you actually get into the race. And so I see a lot of Timothys out there. In fact, we're all a Timothy. And so the question I want to give you is, do you have or are you looking for a Paul? someone who's going to spiritually invest in you. Someone who's going to take time to build you up and hold you accountable. And sometimes that's hard. That's part of the suffering too. Because sometimes we don't want to look at ourselves in the mirror. And sometimes our spiritual parents, our coaches, see more truth about us than we will accept ourselves. We're all Timothys. Who is your Paul? But we are also all Pauls. And so the next question is, who is your Timothy? It doesn't matter how old or young you are. Because the same words that apply to Timothy apply to every single of us. Have you taken what has been said, that has been entrusted to you? How are you taking that and handing it off to others? You don't have to have a seminary degree. You don't have to know the Bible inside and out or have it memorized. You just have to take what has been given to you, that has been entrusted to you, and hand it off to the next person to build them up. As someone's investing in you, you're investing into them. That is the relationship Paul has, and he has to remind Timothy, as I pour into you, you need to pour into others. Because it's not just about you, it's about the next generation and the next and the next. And so in order for this whole evangelism and kingdom building thing works, you got to take it and you got to hand it off. It's not one person's job, it's everybody's job. Timothy, I give it to you, but you got to give it to everyone else. Keep reminding God's people of these things, and that is what I want to remind you all this morning. But here's the thing about being a Paul or Timothy. You never know, of course, where they might come from either. But when we have them, we know the impact that they have. Can I get a witness? And I want to call up Tyler, who's actually going to give his witness.
When he gave us his story about the Grand Canyon. I might get a little emotional, so please give me some grace. Throughout all this, I brought this up to Josh probably about a year ago, right after we did the marriage series. I thought a parenting one would be really well received. So thank you, Josh, for listening to me on that. And I've been extremely lucky in my life. I've been able to have several father figures be available to me, from grandparents, aunts and uncles, coaches, my father-in-law, and a lot of great examples here at church as well. I'm going to try to keep this just to two of them today. I'm sure you guys want to get lunch and better things to do. So, as my wife says, I can't tell a story without giving you all the information, so we'll just kick it to two. I was extremely lucky in my life, like I said earlier, but I also got to meet every single one of my great-grandparents. One of my great-great-grandparents was alive when I was born. My girls were able to have that same experience with their great-great. I grew extremely close with one set of them. It's a special bond that I will take with me the rest of my life. My grandma and papa, as I call them, taught me many lessons that were actual lessons, let alone just watching them. And I'm going to give you two of those today. The first one is finding a partner. I was extremely lucky to be able to watch them fall in love even more every day. They were married for 64 years, so I'd hope they would. Just being able to have conversations, even though they worked together, they lived together. One of my favorite things I remember now, At the time, I was probably a little annoyed, but my grandparents had a timeshare at Table Rock. From where we lived, it was about 6 hours. And the way my grandpa drove, sometimes it'd be longer than that. But with that, half the time we didn't even have the radio on. They'd just be sitting there having conversations. Like I said, they worked together. My grandpa built cold storage doors. My grandma was his secretary. They were around each other all day long. So you would think they would already know everything, but throughout those 6 hours, they'd have great conversation. That's something I looked for in my wife, and it's something I received. There's many more with that, but like I said, you don't want me up here all day. But the last thing is how to love your family. I'm going to give you a quick story that I've heard many times, and my grandma, I'm sure, will be able to give you this too. Being able to learn to drop everything and be there for someone. Actually, I guess I'm going to give you two. My grandma, not my great-grandma, my grandma had a house fire. We had my uncle passed away of SIDS when he was young. My great-grandpa was a firefighter. Their house caught on fire. She had a box of his stuff upstairs. He gave everything to be able to provide for his kids. He climbed upstairs through the window, broke it out, and got his items out of there. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks after that. That is dropping everything for your kids. I'm sorry, hold on. He also gave up many opportunities in business and life for my grandma. When they first started dating, he was able to had a chance to go work on the Alaskan pipeline back in the 50s and 60s. He was going to make very good money for the time, and it would have been even very good money for now. My grandma asked him to stay because they just, again, started dating, and he did because he knew that was the love of his life. So rather than taking that opportunity to, further himself financially, he stayed to build his family and for love. So that's two things that I've lived my life to be able to do, and I was very lucky to be able to know him. Moving on to my second father figure, and it's funny because this has been one of my favorite Bible verses or passages because I could connect with it on a different level. So it's Matthew 1, chapter 1, verse 18 through 25. And for us non-Bible scholars, that is when the angel visited Joseph. So here's Tyler's paraphrasing of that. Joseph learned that Mary was pregnant and realized that, it couldn't be mine. He was going to quietly divorce her because at the time he did not want to ruin her name. When he did that, he went to bed the next day. He was going to go do that. An angel came to him in his dream. That angel told him, Mary, and take care of her son. This is conceived by the Holy Spirit. You shall name him Jesus, and he'll be the King of all kings. So Joseph trusted God and did what he was told. He married Mary and took care of Jesus as his own. To many people, that is not a story of a father, but to me it is. That is also the passage about a person becoming a father. To many people, a father is defined naturally, but to me, it is more about the man itself. The reason I connect with that is I don't know my biological father. My dad and my mom started dating when I was 6 months old. They married when I was in first grade, and then shortly after that, he started the adoption process. 5th grade, I was adopted by him. I got to hear the words of the judge of, "Here's your dad," and I will never forget that. I do remember him telling the judge when he went up on the stand to ask him why. He said, "It's because I've always loved him. And he has always treated me like a son from the very beginning." He's taught me a lot of things, but again, you're going to hear this number a lot. Here's 2 things he's taught me. He's taught me hard work and self-reliance is important in life, but being helpful to others is almost just as important. If it's, coming to church and vacuuming the floors, or monetarily, or taping the windows out of the parsonage at our church so that they can paint it. He owns a body shop by trade, so he does it every day, and he's pretty dang good at it. So I've learned a lot up there. I started going up there at 6 years old and worked there until I went to college. Many of those things, another one of the things he's taught me is family is the only thing guaranteed in life, and that's why we have to stick together and be honest at all times. But going into that, my dad could care less about sports, could not. Would rather go work at the shop any day than watch a football game, unless it's the Chiefs, because the rest of my brothers can't stand the Chiefs, and so he just does it to mess with us. But if any of us were playing, he never missed a game. He made himself like it because we liked it. One of the things, I was a part of a pretty good football team. I was a very average player, but I went to state 3 times in 4 years, won 2 of them. The one I remember the most, though, was my junior year when we lost. The first person there was my dad. Because I cared so much, he cared. He was the one that told me it's going to be all right. I still got another year, but he knew it hurt and that he's here. I didn't do this bad on the first one. Sorry, guys. And it's something I'll never forget. As an adult now, I understand a lot more of what my dad sacrificed. Like Joseph, we have the same issues today. So I'm sure people around town said stuff. I'm sure he had family say stuff. Never let us know that. Sorry, I lost my place. My dad has a lot of quotes. He uses them every day. I'll be honest, most of them aren't appropriate to say here, but I got a couple. And this is probably the one that stuck with me the most. I've used it coaching, and I've used it actually for some of our family. As many of you know, my sister-in-law is the director, or has been the director of the high school plays. We went up there to just see her, because she spent quite a bit of time up there, and I just noticed they were kind of ripping into the kids, and then they finally said, "I don't even have anything to say." So they asked if anyone had anything to say. I stood up and I gave them this quote. "We get on you because we love you and we want you to succeed. I know you're better because you are better. If I didn't care, we wouldn't say anything at all." When they said that I have anything to say, that was a big deal. I've had that reinforced with coaches, other family members, but the one that meant the most, the one that said it to me, was my dad. Just because I knew that was real love. He had a lot of tough love. He'd get on us. He always does. But I know it's coming from a good place. I'm very appreciative of it now as an adult, because it's taught me more than a lot of people have before. It lets me get through the days a lot of the times and enjoy the little things. But I always know I'm able to keep going. The biggest thing with my dad, and I probably have said that 4 or 5 times now, so I just kept writing it, I guess, but he was not my dad out of obligation. He was my dad because he chose to be. Even though I hit him over the head with a Tonka truck when he was napping when I was little. He doesn't let me forget that one. I've never really understood those sacrifices till I became a dad myself. I've taken a lot from him. My mom says I'm a little too much like him, so we'll see how it goes when the girls get a little older. I see a lot here, but one of the things is, going back to that passage, is Joseph did not have to be a father figure to Jesus, but he chose to be. I'm not saying my dad received a message in a dream from an angel. He would probably like for me to say he did, but he was definitely my guardian angel. But I do think God knew what he was doing, because my dad's name is Brent Joseph Ostner. He was named after Joseph the carpenter. And he will tell you he's not a carpenter at all, but he's a pretty decent body man. So, thank you guys, and happy Father's Day.
Whether it's raising kids or discipling kids, it's all about life. Showing what life is like and how God intended. And that's what he wants to hand off to you. And that's what I hand off to you and remind you. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, I thank you so much for the fathers. For the biological fathers, the spiritual fathers, the mentors, the coaches, all the father figures, Lord, that we all experience who've been a positive influence in our life. For the moments where they were gentle, the moments that they were tough, the ones who kept it real, and those who, Lord, were soft. Lord, we thank you that you make those fathers possible, as you are the Father who shows us all what it's like to truly love each other, our children. And so, Lord, I pray for everyone in here that they, Lord, that they, if they don't have already, Lord, that they find spiritual fathers and mothers who will pour into them. And Lord, at the same is that they too will become spiritual fathers and mothers to pour into others, so that we can continue this kingdom relay race to build this new society called the kingdom of heaven, so that we will be ready for when Jesus returns and calls us home. And we will all dine together as family. And it's this we pray in his holy and precious name, and all of God's people said, amen.